so the session I like, which we are trying to do is basically using note taking tools like Evernote or Roam to build, to create a structure which helps, support our creativity. So I have Arvind here, who is, doing some really interesting work with Gatsby and Roam. Like I saw his tweets recently, and that's where I reached out to him and, wanted to know whether he would be interested in doing a session, for the community. So thanks, Arvind, for, doing this. I think this, like, I'm quite excited to, share like whatever we have, planned for this 1 hour. So could you just start off with a quick intro and just to,
Yep,
set
sure.
context about what you
So,
do? Yeah.
yeah. So my name is Arvind. I work as a front-end engineer at a company called Paperpile, where we build tools for research students and people who write papers, theses and all. So other than that, I've been like invested a lot into note-taking recently. So I've used quite a lot of apps like I started out with Evernote and then switched to Notion and then went to Rome, which is romeresearch.com. It's like in beta now, but they are like charging a huge amount. So after that, I've switched to Bear app, which is a like Mac only or iOS only app. So that is the history with note-taking apps. But I was really excited when I came about these concepts of note-taking, which is not relevant to any app, but the concepts are they help you like take notes in a good way that come back and help you in the long run. So I've been interested in this, and if you guys don't know, I run a podcast with a friend of mine called Brithik. It's learningcurve.dev. We can have links later. So in that, we talked a few things about how to like start building a second brain. What is a second brain and all. So I think I'll be able to tell a few things to you guys about what second brain is. So I think the main thing that happens to me when I start writing and taking notes is that like people don't write often because they don't value their ideas that much. We don't consider that the notes that we take won't help us in the future. But what happens is that when you start taking notes and organize them in a particular way, then you can have them come back to you and surprise you in the long run. So let's start about why you should like take notes instead of remembering everything. Okay. So this is the type of overview that we've planned. So first is why we need a second brain, and then what is the para framework, and then there are a few techniques called para and progressive summarization, and then we'll end by showing you the current setups that I and Abhishek have. We'll share screens and show you how we organize our stuff. Okay,
Yeah.
so first let's like start off by saying why we need a second brain. So basically, the concept of second brain is that we have our complete thoughts and the notes that we take are stored in some particular place, be it I mean digital in our case because a lot of things are digital now. So instead of keeping everything in the head, we have a few things in a note-taking app. Okay, so the main concept here is that our brain is basically a CPU and not a hard disk. So when you free your mind from the storage part, you will have time to think. So we can use our second brains to store what we think and like not care a lot about remembering a lot of stuff because we have already stored that, and we can use our processing power to like come up with new ideas or connecting them, interlinking them, and in turn we have a like a good product out of our mind. So and a great analogy that I would like to point out is imagine you went to shop for groceries. Okay, you get the groceries, now you have a handful of groceries. So you have stuff, but in order to cook something with those groceries, you need to like put them off and then start, and only then you can have the like time to take those groceries and convert into something that you can eat. So that is what second brain does to us.
Nice. I
Any
think I've
thoughts
got
you
that
want to
analogy.
add?
No, I think I love that analogy. I'm hearing that for the first time, but it seems to, like really stick. I really, like that. So yeah. So moving on, to the, so we're still discussing like why we need a second brain. And we have this, wonderful quote where by James Clear, where he says that many people think they lack motivation, but what they actually lack is clarity. And this is, one of the things that like I've been seeing firsthand with me. Like when I start my day and I am not very clear about what to do, it's a very overwhelming feeling for me. It's like, I have so many things to do, and so many different type of tasks to do, so many different projects to do. And it feels that I just feel like running away. I don't want to face them. But then this ritual of, like obviously this is not directly related with building a second brain, but this ritual of, planning out my day, like clearing out my to-do list, figuring out, what are the things that I could possibly do. Like there's limited time in a day, you can only do so much, right? So that's where, like, having that clarity, brings some, let's say, it brings some sanity to the day. And that is what I feel, like with all of us in being knowledge workers. I think there are so many things to do, and if you have side projects, then God help you. So that's where I think, like, having that clarity helps you to, keep making that little progress. And with that progress, I think, motivation comes as well. I think that's one of the reasons why I feel there's value in investing, in this system. This is like a productivity system, like many systems, but I feel this is, very much essential in how we, are working in this new age where we are dealing with a lot of information, things like that. So yeah, as I mentioned, as in, like, this is one of the bane of, being a knowledge worker. We are still a very very young species of sorts, right? There has been a lot of, like books written about how to improve the productivity of a factory worker. But when it comes to, like people like us, I think we are still figuring this out. And one of the, like, challenges that I had was I used to consume a lot of content from the internet, read a lot of books, and my Evernote would be full of these notes which would just, lie there unused, unorganized. And I would, like, feel overwhelmed with, like so many notes. And that's where, I was attracted to this idea of building a second brain. So a lot of, like, just a quick disclaimer before, we kind of dive deeper. So a lot of these ideas that you are hearing are from this course that I did, which was Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte. So I just wanted to put that out. So these are, not original ideas. These are ideas, like, problems that I faced. And, I when I did that course, I think, that was like a really huge fillip for me. So yeah, I think we'll, kind of move. So anything, that you would like to add, Arvind, here
No, no,
on
I've,
the
I
topic of.
mean, it's the same thing. I'm actually also very motivated with or very interested in this framework because I have also like found it for the same reasons that you did. And Tiago Forte, the man who came up with this framework, is like a huge motivator for me, and I look up to him in a lot of things. So yeah, let's continue with this.
Yeah. So we'll have, links to all of the resources that we are referring to at the end of the, session. So just hold, like, this session, we have so many things to talk about, but we can only do so much in an hour. So that's where, like, we're just scratching the surface here, but we want to get your curiosity up, as in, like, why am I, like, so interested about this. So the first framework that a lot of people, or Tiago advocates, is this idea about a para framework. So what para is basically an abbreviation for this different type of areas, or like the projects that are currently there. So there's projects, there's areas, resources, and archives. So this is essentially the para framework. So the idea behind having this classification is that you kind of like the problem with consuming information is that it's not very actionable. Like the analogy that I would like to give here is of a library. Like a library uses a lot of categories, because essentially that's the way you are able to find out which book like you want to read, or which particular resource to look into, if you want to dive into a particular category. But when it comes to like the productivity, measuring the productivity of a knowledge worker, we like our unit of productivity is more of projects. Like we cannot we cannot judge ourselves on the quality of ideas or on the number of ideas that we come up with, because that is not very concrete, right? So that's like a little bit. And the other extreme is the idea of having goals. Like we can have a goal that we want to start a business of, like, but that's like a goal which could take a lot of time, and that would become like very demotivating. So project is like a middle ground between these two areas, between like it's not like ideas where there is less, like it's not very actionable. But also like the beauty of having projects is that your scope is limited, you have a deadline, and that helps you to see that how the information that you're collecting is actually translating into some output. So this is like the factory thing, like what input is coming into the system, and the output is, let's say, the blog posts that are coming out of para, the the projects that you're shipping, things like that. I mean, so I think that's essentially the differentiation. Like earlier I would have categories, and like every task would be associated with a category, but then like there would be no deadline, and like the scope was unlimited, and that's where it kind of created that overwhelming feeling. So the whole building a second brain kind of asks you to divide your set of like the like all of the things that you're doing. You divide it into these 4 sections, where projects are the most actionable things, and areas, resources, and archives are less actionable, and you just want to keep them for future like reference purposes, things like that. But your projects are your current projects, and that helps you to keep a very laser-eyed focus on what you need to ship. So like I think, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the channel, in the chat. I think we just to keep the flow going, I think we'll take on these questions at the end. I'm sure like uh, there would be a lot of questions, but I'll surely take them up at the end of the call. Yeah. Arvind, anything that you'd like to
So to add
talk
upon
about para?
that, to add upon that, projects is something that have a specific deadline on, and how I see resources is that you have every note you take or anything that you collect comes into a resource, and I organize that into a specific project and an area. So areas in life, to give an example, for me, one of the areas that I have is sharing knowledge, and one project under it is like podcasting. So every note that I take, which is a podcast episode idea, gets categorized into the podcast project under the sharing knowledge area. And then I also write a few technical posts and blogs on my website. So that is another project under the sharing knowledge area. And I have another area called learning, which has where the projects are, the courses that I take up, or the technologies that I'm interested in. It's like that. And if I'm not currently working on a project anymore, that is the time when I move that back to the archive. So projects specifically contains things that you're currently working on. So if you have an app idea and you like worked on it for a while, which was a current project for you, but you don't have time anymore, so you wanted to like take it up in the future, that is the time when you move it back to an archive, so that when you see your projects, you currently see only the things that you're working on. So that has been like a good way for me to categorize on that, and that actually makes you read upon stuff which is related to your active projects more, because archives are something that I don't see more, but I only see about the projects which like triggers or lets me browse a lot of things related to the current projects. So by this I could like limit the amount of browsing that I do on my web.
Yeah, that's so good, you
And
know.
and as you said, instead of categorizing things into categories, or for example, when I used Evernote, which was like back in like 4 years ago or 5 years ago, I used to create a tag for everything, tag for every note. And I like coming up with a tag name was very difficult, and then those tags were not organized in itself. But after this projects and area stuff came in, I can like categorize a specific note into a project, which is very helpful in finding them in the future.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. As in, like a tag is not very actionable. As in, like, you know, you can like
Too
have a lot of,
specific.
yeah, you can have a lot of you know, content, lot of notes that you might have taken for a particular, you know, tag. But then when once you see that the notes are actually translating into and some kind of artifact, like, you know, like an end product, that's when, you know, you actually enjoy consuming. I think then you actually want to, you know, uh, go and read some blog posts, and, you know, like that's where you see the value then translating. So we will, you know, we can, you know, dive into more examples. Like I could show you my, you know, Evernote classification. I think some examples would be helpful, but we'll do that, you know, in the interest of time. I think we can, you know, like if we have time, we'll do that at the end. So so moving on to the, you know, like the other beauty of setting of para. So we actually, you know, work on so many different tools right now. So we have, you know, like Evernote and Todoist, you know, as our main, like this is my system, as in like it will differentiate from person to person. But I'm using Evernote, I'm using Todoist, I'm using Google Drive, I'm using, you know, my local system, file system. So what, you know, like building a second brain, like this whole productivity system advocates, is that you have this classification where all of your tools are set up, you know, using the para framework, so that when you're context switching, it doesn't, you know, create that friction, which, you know, like all of these tools are set up very differently. Like Todoist has its own advantages, Evernote has its own advantages, Notion has, you know, has a different, you know, set of features. So how can, you know, like you create like a personal knowledge management system which works for you? And obviously, like these tools are not working with each other to make sure that they can work in sync. But for us, we have to, you know, like use all of these tools differently. Like, you know, we have to use, it's not possible for us to, let's say, not use a to do list. As in, I think like you can, but, you know, it's difficult to manage without, you know, doing that. So what para also allows, as you can see in these screenshots, like this have been taken from, you know, my setup. So as you can see, I have, you know, essentially the same. So it's difficult to keep them in sync sometimes, but at least, you know, like if you just look at the first, you know, layer, you know that, you know, there is still a lot of similarity. At least, you know, like that laser eyed focus continues from, you know, tool to tool. So that's where, like the beauty of investing time in this, particular system. And yeah, so Arvind, you want to,
Yeah.
maybe, so we'll move on to the next tool, which is next idea, which is progressive summarization. So Arvind, you want to take that up?
Yeah. So progressive summarization is basically a technique which says that when you visit a note back, I mean, if when you took a note and that thing is helpful to you, what you do there is you bold a few lines, and uh, that is the first layer. There are like a 5-layered approach to progressive summarization, which says that first layer is the notes that you take. It's like just from the basic where you like read something and take a note. That is the first layer. And then the second layer is that you bold a few good parts that you like. Okay. And then another layer that you can apply on that is you highlight a few like very interesting points from those notes. What happens with this is that when you look at that note in future, you can just read that highlight and come to know if that note is something that you want to like dive deep into or like pass by. Because when we take notes, the context that you are taking the note in is different from when you are reading it. Right. So, and then, I mean, there are two more layers to the progressive summarization thing. So the fourth layer is like writing out a mini summary out of it. And then fifth one is remixing. Remixing in the sense what the author says is that you create a type of illustration out of it or write your own blog post using those ideas, which makes you remember more and then also like helps you in like you can read that and get the complete context later. So so this is like crunching all the information so that you don't lose the context as well as you understand the note and also it is discoverable easily.
Yeah,
So and like this makes you think of your future self and let you take notes for your like future self when like think if your 40-year-old self needs to look when they look at this note what they want to get back from it. So the
that's good.
context might be different, uh, and like reading these highlights makes it get into that context faster. So
So
this is
Arvind,
screenshot is an example of Abhishek's note where he like used a few layers to compress the
yeah.
notes and organize it.
So I'll just maybe take a quick detour here. Uh,
Mhm.
just a second. So this screenshot is essentially like taken from this note. So Arvind, can you see this,
Yeah.
please? Yeah. So this is like like I had to like start with the habit of writing a weekly status email at my last job, and I came across this article which is like a really nice one, but then it's like 500 words at least. So this is quite a long article, and I don't want to be doing like going back to that article again and again. So again, this is like a funnel of like filtration, like different filters. So the first filter was that I just like in this note, whatever highlights or whatever paragraphs that you're seeing are from like the highlights that I have collected using Instapaper. Like Instapaper allows you to highlight articles when you're reading them, and that's like the first layer of summarization. Now the second one is things which I like really appeal to me are the ones which are put in bold, and the things which I feel like if I want to scan this article in let's say 5 seconds, those are highlighted. So again, like I like this is a work in progress, and as Arvind mentioned, like the next thing to do would be to write a summary about this, like like write something about this. And the even better thing to do would be like if one day, I want to write something about like a weekly status email, like, or maybe in my company itself, like if I start a company and I want to, send out a note, send out a memo to my employees saying that, hey, we are starting this practice, and this is why we are doing it. So I have this note which allows me to, craft something which is going to be much more powerful than, something which, if I try to, start my research at that particular point of time. So essentially what we're doing is, we are using the process of slow burn, where we kind of, research over a long period of time. And when the task is actually required, when you actually, need to ship something which is related to this note, that's when the value of having a note taking system comes into picture.
Yeah, and I
So
think
back,
we should
yeah,
allow ourselves to, I mean, every note ideally cannot be like this. So I think we should allow ourselves to have most of the notes connected together.
hey Arvind.
So what I do is I do different layers only if the note like helps me in the future. And if I see myself going back to that note, only then I do a lot of these layers and stuff. So I think it's important that we let ourselves our note be uh, unorganized also. And
Yeah,
the slow burn thing that you mentioned, so what happens is slow burning is a concept where you allow yourself to collect a lot of material over time, and then in Abhishek's case it is giving idea in your next company. But you can what you another example that I would like to give is if you want to start a podcast, you have been collecting a lot of notes over time about like a good mic, a podcasting setup, or how you write so that it helps to your podcast. You can do all this research over what, 1 or 2 years, and then when you're actually starting your podcast, you go back, refer to all those notes, collect all the ideas, and then start. You can have basically a head start in your podcast
yeah. Hey Arvind, are you there?
to start from there. I think that with the course, he was saying 1 hour he could. Am I audible? Yeah, right.
I think your voice is breaking. I'm not sure whether
Is it
that's
good
just
now?
me. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, so what I was trying to say is that Tiago Forte could sit 1 hour on this, refer back to his old notes, and come up with a outline for his course by referring to those old notes. So that is what happens when you have proper note-taking systems. And yeah, the next thing is making your notes evergreen. So these are something I don't know where I picked this from, but it is a very good uh, example. So a note, evergreen note is something which is valid irrespective of the time that you are looking at. So this particular example that I have put here, working with the garage door open. So this is I came this idea I got from Andy's notes, which I link. So what happens this is whenever I refer to this note, there is no context is in this. So you can basically develop evergreen notes from books that you're reading or material that you're reading, and you make that idea evergreen, which says that that is a valid idea over the years. So whenever now what I do is whenever I read a book or read a few articles, I try to come up with these evergreen points, which can be valid over time.
So this is essentially like creating like your own OS of sorts, like you're
Your own
creating
values
these
and
value,
yeah,
yeah, values and things like that. And that's something which, like if you do it over a period of time, I think it creates a lot of much more coherence with what you actually are as a person. I think you cannot just do it in one day. It takes a lot of time to understand what the values are, things like that. So good thing. So I think before we like how much time do we have? So I think so, Arvind, what
Mhm.
I'm thinking, like we can do is, should we do this before, or should we, just take up the questions that are, there in the chat? If
Let's
you
take up
can
the
see,
questions. Yeah.
let's take up the questions. I think we can, share our tools if we have time. But I think it's important that we kind of, like, because there's a lot of, like, there is, these ideas are very, like, let's say, very broad in that sense. So I think it's always good to take some questions. Is writing important, or if recording by yourself is actually any tools to take? So am I audible, guys?
Yeah. You were breaking a bit,
Yeah.
but I don't know if it was my internet or yours.
No, no. I think it was
Okay.
my internet, but we'll just go with the flow. Pray like that this holds up. So Saurabh, I think there is like this tool called Otter.ai, which I've used a couple of times to transcribe the recordings that we have done at our sessions. So that's a good tool to take voice memos, and it has a good Android app as well. So you can actually, it has good Android and iPhone app. So it's something which I've been hearing from a lot of people on Twitter, that people are using voice much more in, like, voice is a much more intuitive medium to sum up your ideas. Like writing might have that friction. So that is surely, I think, the future, I would say. We're still not there with the technology, but we are getting better with the transcribing thing. I think voice is surely going to play a very key role in note taking. So Praveen's question is, can we search in voice recordings? Is that tech even available? So Praveen, I
Otter
think,
does it.
and Arvind, feel free to cut me if you wanted.
Yeah, yeah. So I was
Sorry.
telling Otter does the searching part, I think, because I take a lot of notes with Otter as well. So what happens is whenever I am listening to podcast or audiobook, it's quicker to
Okay.
open an app and just start recording to record the ideas. So I use Otter to record a few ideas, but what I do is I have this obsession of getting everything into a single place. So I go
Hmm.
back to those like transcriptions and get them back to my current system, whether it be it
Note
Notion
taking
or
system.
Roam. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So and then it
Yeah.
becomes like searchable.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope, Praveen, that answers your question. I think the knowledge is there when it comes to searching directly in voice, but the workaround is to transcribe them and save them in Evernote, and then you can always use that search. And it's always good to have all the notes in one place. You can have some of them in Otter and some of them in Evernote, and few of them in another note taking system, like let's say Apple iNotes, or things like that. I think it's always good to make sure that all of these notes are funneled into one key note taking tool, which you trust, essentially. So this question by Sankalp is going to be interesting. I think that's why I asked Arvind to join this session, because I want to learn more about Rome as well. So Arvind, can you take this question up? Like,
Yeah. So
Sankalp wants
what
to understand
Rome
what are the.
ideologies are conflicts and differences in ideologies of second brain and Rome research. I think what Rome research does well is to like interconnect the thoughts or the notes that we take. So it is very unorganized and it respects that because what ideally happens is your thoughts are not structured, which Rome allows it to be. And whenever you are taking notes in Rome research, you can like code them in double brackets, and that becomes a page ideally. So, and because it is this like diverse, you can do a lot of things with it. You can ideally use it to organize, I mean, replicate this para system in like Rome as well, but like it'll take some effort. So I think uh, second ideologies of second brain in the sense it is totally possible with Rome, but the main thing that Rome now like has is that it is like a little pricey. It is $15 per month if you are looking out for a monthly plan. So that is a little pricey, but I am lucky to be a beta user and I have not paid anything for it yet, but they let me use my database without like it is still accessible to me. So I'll see if is this right time to show my like room setup. Can you guys hear me? I can't.
Hey, I'm back.
Okay.
I think I had to restart my Zoom.
Right, right.
So Arvind, I can hear you now.
Okay. So yeah, so things are like you can do it. Why Rome loads Tiago? Because I think Tiago has a few things set up if for a for an app to qualify it capable of being a second brain, which is like it should be accessible on every device, and a few things like your notes should be offline and you should be able to take notes like quickly capture your ideas and all. I think Rome is still not there yet, but in their uh, roadmap, they have mentioned that they are looking out to build APIs and desktop apps and mobile apps, which is a good thing to look out for.
Yeah. So I just want to quickly add to that. I think, and that might, answer Praveen's question as well, as in like what are tools that would uh, last till 40 years. That's a very difficult question to answer. But then when you're choosing a system, I think it makes sense to choose something which is very stable and especially when you're investing so much time into like it incorporate this productivity system. I think that is what Tiago's idea is, that he's using Evernote right now to create like all of these, like his bet is on Evernote right now, but then he's also keeping a watch on Rome and like what are the interesting ideas that are happening in those circles as well. So that's where you don't want to keep changing your tools that often, otherwise that would become your, let's say, distraction of sorts, like you if you
Like
kind
me.
of get into that. So I hope that answers your query, Sankalp. I wasn't able to hear a lot of it, but I hope feel free to post follow-up questions. Any more questions? Arvind, my chat history is lost, so you'll
Yeah,
have to help
so
me here. Yeah.
you yeah, in the 40-year run. So I also don't trust these companies. So what I do is I take an export from Rome very often, like once a day. And I try to back that up in a Dropbox or a Google Drive. And I've taken exports from like Notion and all, and Notion or Evernote, and then keep things at least in Markdown format so that I at least have access in a code editor. support that Roam. The problem there is that I'm back. So I was telling about Obsidian, which is a app that runs in a local directory of Markdown files. So that one app, like you can trust that the files are there in your system, and uh, they're not lost. Even if there is no Obsidian tomorrow, you have your Markdown files with you. The disadvantage with that is that it is only a desktop app, so you don't have that on phone or any other device. But I think you can use your directory to backup with Dropbox or something, and then you can use other apps on Android or iOS to write to that directory. That's one good thing. Any more questions? I lost my
I
chat as well.
Oops. I think that was like the last question, I hope. But just to add to that thought, I think I pay for Evernote to make sure that they don't, like die as a company. Just to make sure that, they're still around and, keep going with this company, because somewhere, like in the news, I read that, Evernote is not doing well, and I kind of freaked out. And I was like, hey, I need to, become a paying subscriber now. Enough of the free fees. So anyways, as in that was, so I think unless we have more questions, so what we can do now is maybe switch context again, and move back to the regular thing that we have planned. So Arvind, maybe you can start off by doing a screen share of like the tools and the workflows that you have. Let's,
Yeah.
I think, take 5 minutes each. We are finishing up on time, so let's
Mhm.
quickly do that, and obviously we can take up more questions after that. Yeah, so are you able to host? Yeah.
Yeah, so I've just shared my screen. This is
Yeah.
room research. There is a theme onto it. That's the reason you can't see. Let me turn the theme off. It's all hacky. So what happens here is that when you log on to Roam Research, it presents you with a daily page, a daily note page. And what I'm doing right now is like taking a few things with in like morning pages, which is like a thing that I want to get out of my head, and it gives me a clear picture of the day ahead. So that is what happens. And so I have a few projects that I work on, which are categorized as projects that are related to Hey, am I back?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think the
I think.
internet is weak. So I think what I'll do is I'll record a video, post it to YouTube, and then post it back on Slack. Would that
Yeah.
work?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
That
that will
that
be
should
better. So
be
you can go with your setup.
okay. Cool. Let me just share my screen. So I'm praying to the internet gods that like
Yeah,
this
let's all
thing
pray.
works. So let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
So I want to show, like, I wanted to show a couple of examples which are pretty recent, and I think the like the beauty is, seeing it actually, adding value to the things that I'm doing. So recently this week I had launched, like I published a code of conduct, uh, which somebody had said that, it is a must, and it's something which, should be in place. So you can see that, like a lot of these things, like I've just clipped them from different parts of the internet. So these are different communities which I knew of, and then there were also specific ideas to the remote Indian community. So the beauty was that I had all of this, let's say, clay of sorts. Like this is all clay which is sitting there, and now, because like it's just 9 notes, and I know that the end product is going to be that, this is going to be like a guide of sorts. So that's where, like I kind of took different pieces from different notes, and I came up with this first draft. So that is where I see, the value of note taking in this sense. The second example, which I thought I'll show, and this is much more like, this is not a current project, but this is more like a, I would say, like an area of sorts, or maybe a resource I might want to create one day, is to how to use Twitter effectively. So I follow a lot of people like David Perel, and there are like a lot of people who keep sharing links on Twitter, where there are Twitter guides, things like that. My screen is not refreshing, it seems, but just maybe go with the headings that are here. So then there's this Ben Thompson article as well, where he's trying to destructure why Twitter makes sense. And then there is this YouTube video as well, which is again David Perel, which in a conversation with a director of social media for the New York Stock Exchange. So all of these are sitting right now. I don't necessarily feel the urge to write an ebook of sorts, but if someday any friend or any colleague wants to know that, hey, I want to actually get start increasing my followers on Twitter, I can actually like take 1 hour and take the best pieces out of it. And as you can see, these notes are not very well summarized. Like I've just bolded them, so it's not like, and the rest of the notes are actually not like I've not even reviewed them. But it wouldn't take me more than 2 hours, like to come up with something which would be super valuable for this friend of mine, or even for my own purpose. Like one day, if I want to suddenly decide that, hey, I want to increase my followers to 1,000. So so this is like the power of having a system like this. And yeah, I think I'll just maybe show this as well, as in like what are the projects which are currently going on. So obviously this needs to be archived, which is creating a code of conduct. And this one is, I think, like the main project right now, which is building this beta website. Then I have one for Zoom calls as well, like the weekly Zoom calls that are going on, things like that, man. And it can even be as small as like writing a blog post. Like I had one for this one, which was 3 ways to use Evernote more productively. So then like whatever notes you're collecting, they actually make sense. That's where you want to so again, this one is again another new blog post which I want to write. Like this is a very personal one, but why I want to be an artist. So again, I'm like listening to a podcast, and I'm taking notes. I'm listening to this wonderful lady called Elizabeth Gilbert. She has written this book called Big Magic. So I'm just listening to her audiobook, and I keep writing my notes into this particular folder. So that's essentially, the areas are much more broader. So this is more like health, uh, design. I want to spend some time learning design. So as you can see, I think it's much more it's like I feel more in control, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So Like rather than having vague notebooks and vague tags, now with this para you have a structure to your notebooks and you know where a particular note would go. So that at least saves you the peace of mind while taking a note, and basically you also know where to find it in the future.
So I think that is pretty much it. Uh, what what I would like share at the end of the session is, if you want to dig deeper into this, I think I hope we guys have done a good enough job of uh, creating some curiosity around this. So if you want to dig deeper, there are two like notes which are illustrated notes of Tiago's second brain course. Then there is this summary of sorts. Again, this guy is a developer, but he did this Tiago's course, and he wrote a really nice summary out of it. And obviously, if you have the money, you can always go for the real deal. So I'll share this in the chat, and especially the illustrations are really good. If you guys should like, I think we are, because of the time limitations, we couldn't cover into everything, but this was kind of, I hope this was pretty useful. Any questions,
Also, there
guys?
is one resource I would like to add, which is
Hmm.
Tiago's Building a Second Brain podcast. So this is a 10 episode podcast where he explains
I think Arvind is still stuck again. Seems. So guys, I'm just going to unmute you all and feel free to participate in this conversation. So Sankalp, any questions, guys? I think you have the ability to unmute yourself.
Yeah, no, I think
So
this was
any
really well put. I have been organized, like, so I think you introduced me to the second brain idea some time back, and
yeah
I've started following that for some time. And I think recently I came across the room research or the evergreen nodes and gardens and whatever you call that, that kind
yeah
of idea, trying to improve my process, which will also involves a lot of different tools, devices, processes. So yeah, still improving everything. So I think this, like, being able to glimpse at how you do this, and also some of the things that you mentioned, I think those really helped.
awesome, man. I think Arvind has pasted the link of the podcast. I think that's like a really crisp version of all of the ideas that Tiago presents in his course. I think that's a must listen. Like, I have listened to it once, and it's really good. And the article that I've linked is actually like a summary of the podcast of the 10 episodes that are there. So there is one, maybe this would be like a bonus section of sorts. Like, I had one thing which I couldn't fit into the slides because I wasn't sure we would have the time for it. But Arvind, like, do you have the time? We can
Yeah,
like stretch
sure.
for
Yeah,
5 more
okay.
minutes, right?
Sure.
So I just want to quickly share one thing which might be a roadblock when you are actually implementing the system. I think this one is, I feel very very important. So can I share my whole desktop? Yeah. So let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can.
So this is something which we weren't able to bring up, but one of the questions that come up is that, hey, there is so many things to consume. Like, how do you even filter out what to actually consume? And obviously, one of the ideas that Arvind and I both mentioned is the idea of having current projects. Like, what are the projects, and basically trying to consume or capture your notes. You keeping those in mind. But then there is another idea of having like 12 favorite problems. So what this does is essentially these are very broad questions which you want to attack in your lifetime, and that creates like that divergence of like all of these notes that are coming in. So essentially this is all of the knowledge that you're capturing. And this part, which is the archipelago of ideas, is essentially like that summary, like the notebook that I showed of the code of conduct. So if you can see, like that was an example of an archipelago of ideas. Like you had like 7 8 nodes. So those were like a bunch of nodes which you can then actually, like, those got converged into one single node, which was the code of conduct, if that makes sense. And just to give more clarity, I'll share an example as well. So this is going to be I think, so if you can see my favorite 12 favorite problems, and this is an idea which I think richard Feynman I think he introduced this idea of having 12 favorite problems, and these keep changing over a period of time. I'm sure. So as you can see, there are a lot of things which are very broad, but then they kind of limit, like, the the things that I consume on the internet. Like, I don't want to be reading, like consuming things which are, let's say, related to gaming, because I'm not very curious about it. I might check it out once in a while, but it's not like a big deal for me. But if Nawal is saying something, then I like suddenly my antennas go up, and because it's kind of related to one of these questions which is there. Then there's this guy called Jack Butcher who is doing a great job with visualized value. So he puts out a lot of content about businessy stuff. So then this another thing is permaculture, tiny house, and sustainable living. So these are very broad topics, and I don't feel that I have done justice to any of them. But I think this is pretty much like the my kind of let's say interest fields which are there, and this is like a great way to make sure that you're consuming like wisely, or in the sense it's like uh, so that's where I wanted to show, and I'll quickly show Tiago's example as well. So I really liked his so he's using, I think, Chrome here. So if you can see, he has these different, and these are much more broader than my own problems. So like he's obviously operating at a much higher level. So so then if you look at these questions, like this is how he is kind of making sure that whatever he's consuming or whatever he's producing is actually coherent with what he wants to so yeah, I think this slide I did not put in because I wasn't sure whether we would have the time, but I think this particular image essentially explains building a second brain in one single image. That your starting point is that you have 12 favorite problems, and it takes some time to come up with those questions. It takes some time to figure out what are the problems that you actually want to solve in your lifetime, and those problems give you like a radar of sorts to go ahead and start foraging or start looking for content. Now that you have the content, then you start using progressive summarization, and uh, like any tool which you're using, like whatever features that they add. Rome allows you to link nodes really nicely, so use those features to compress them. And once you compress them, the end product is a product, or the end product is a blog post. So that's essentially like that's how I think we have to measure our productivity as knowledge workers. Nobody's going to kind of like in, like say like how many hours did you spend. I think everybody is going to look at what was the output. And projects allows you to kind of have that confidence that actually you're making progress. And yeah. So